Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 676 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today on the Juicebox Podcast, I don't know why I'm talking like this. Let me start over again. On this episode of the Juicebox Podcast, I'll be speaking with Jake Leach. Jake is, from Dexcom. He's been on the show a bunch of times, and he's here today to talk about G7. It's a short episode, but it's full of good information. If you're looking forward to the Dexcom G7, you're going to like what comes next. While you're listening today, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. If you are a U.S. resident who has type 1 diabetes or is the caregiver of someone with type 1, your answers to simple questions are valuable. Go take the survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. In fewer than 10 minutes, you will help people living with type 1 diabetes while you're supporting the Juicebox Podcast. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med. Get your diabetes supplies from US Med. Find out more and get your free benefits check by going to usmed.com/juicebox, or you can call. I love reading the phone number. It brings me back to my childhood when I watched television. That was who my parents were, the television. And then these ad was, nevertheless, ready? 888-721-1514. That's 888-721-1514. Call now. That is how every ad when I was a kid ended. Was with the phone number, and then they said, call now. Anyway, if you call that number or you go to the link, you can get a free benefits check and get started with US Med. I'll tell you more about them later. I actually just switched over Arden's Omnipods to US Med.
We're working on getting G7 approved. Sorry about being late. It's not a stupid excuse. That's literally what I was just on the phone talking about. Not that it's approved. Don't take that as not on the record. It's more of like we're answering questions.
All right, hold on a second. I can't get my light to come on, so I'm going to be in the dark. But I'll still be. Let me see if I can throw a secondary light on.
No worries, Scott.
No. Let's see. Hey, how are you?
Good, man. How you doing?
I'm okay. So is that really what you were doing? You weren't just like in the bathroom and you couldn't get here on time? What was happening?
No, literally, I was on the phone with our team where, back and forth with the FDA, they ask a question, you answer it, then they want some more clarification, you answer it. And I mean, it really comes down to there's just so much in these filings that they can't possibly read all 38,000 pages. So they just kind of pick areas that they want to spend some time with. So right. We end up helping point them to the right places. And so it's real interactive. It's great and very thorough, but it takes a little time.
Yeah. Does the integration with algorithms change your submission, or is that on the pump person side?
That's on the pump side. Yes. The pump side, they basically, once we get G7 approved as an ICGM, then they quickly do their submission. They have a little bit of validation work they have to do on their side to show that they have compatibility with the new G7 system. But all of this is based on the work that FDA had done to do the ICGM and the iController. It really facilitates quicker approvals. Mm-hmm. If they wouldn't have done that, it almost likely you'd have to run a new study with every generation of technology instead of trying to make them more compatible. So it was good forward thinking on the FDA's part, the way they set it up. So yeah, each of those pump companies will have a submission right after we get G7 approved that they'll have to go through to get the G7 approved for use with their automated insulin delivery systems.
Do you think that, I'm going to ask you to speculate, do you think that's something they have ready to go and they're just waiting for you to get your okay so they can submit theirs? Or is it a process that like starts at day one when you...
No, there are both of them, Tandem and Insulet, are already working on G7 integration. I've already seen prototypes working of their systems. So they, they're not ready to like file it right away. They might be by the time we get G7 approval. We'll see, because we've got probably a little bit more review time on G7. So we'll see. Hopefully, I mean, they're moving as fast as they can. We're supporting them in every way to help them move as fast as possible. But there will be some time where people will stay on G6 if they're on those systems before they can move to G7.
What was I'm going to jump around a little bit here. Do you mind?
No, I'm no problem, man.
You're good. So you got approval overseas already?
Yeah, we got a CE mark last month, and you know how we like to move fast. So we already moved into a limited launch. So G7 is in the hands of customers in the UK right now. At the recent ATTD show that just is wrapping up in Europe, we had a number of clinicians that had used the product as well as some of their customers, and we shared a little bit of feedback. Feedback's been great. No surprises. Everyone loves the smaller size, easy use, new app, the grace period, the 30-minute startup, the more configurable alerts for convenience. There's a whole lot in G7, so everyone's pretty happy with it. We're happy with how it's going. We do these limited launches just to test, both the product, but also just our systems, technical support, make sure we know how to support this thing. Last thing you'd want to do is go big and then have an issue that, while it's correctable, it's sometimes hard to correct when you're at the scale we're at. So you want to get it going a little bit slower at first.
Was that the first time that's happened, that you've gotten something moving overseas before in the US on a new product?
No, it's there's been lots of different reasons over time where this has happened. I'll give you one example. Is G4 actually was approved first in Europe with the Animas pump of all things, right? So that was actually a previously approved version. So that was, and then we ended up redesigning some of the G4 product, made it G4 Platinum, and then launched it. This one was just the case here is that the clinical trial that we had to run for the FDA is a little bit larger and takes longer than the one that is required for the regulatory agencies in Europe. So we purposefully ran two separate trials. We wanted to get the product out as fast as we could. So we ran a trial for Europe and we ran a separate trial for the US, and we submitted the European submission while we were still running the US trial.
Okay. Can I flow through some questions real quick? I think they're going to be kind of quick ones.
Of course.
Excellent. I have, these are from people who listen to the podcast who want to know what they want to know. I'll start with, they're wondering if the new form factor of G7 cuts down on compression lows. I've asked you guys this question in the past and the answer's been, we hope so, but I was wondering if you have any more data.
Yeah, I don't have anything validated to say, if you place the sensors in the exact same spot and you lay on it in a statistical format, does it reduce compression lows? I don't have that, but what we have seen is that with the size of G7, it can be worn, in slightly different, locations particularly on the arm, where you can kind of move it around because the sensor probe is shorter. It's also much more comfortable in the arm, so people have found like they can wear it a little bit lower on their arm, a little bit higher. So we have seen people that, if they experience a compression low, have figured out how to move it around a bit so that they don't have it. But they still can happen on G7. But from a statistically significant perspective, I don't have an exact answer on is it less. But it's certainly more comfortable to wear because it's so much thinner.
Yeah. Hey, you just mentioned the sensor probe. Does it go on a different angle than the G6?
It does. Yeah, it goes straight in. It's a 90-degree angle versus the 45-degree angle. And what we were able to develop sensor technology within our electrodes that allow us to have a shorter sensor probe. So the depth is actually slightly shallower than G7 or G6. So G7 is shallower than G6, and it's also less sensor probe under the skin because it's straight in versus that 45-degree angle.
Oh, no kidding. So the G6 am I ready to test my memory? Is it 13 millimeters?
Yes. Exactly.
I can't believe this is how long I've been doing this, Jake.
Yeah. Nice work.
Right off the top of my head. What about the G7? Do you know the measurement?
6 millimeters.
6 millimeters. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Is the change in size going to impact the cost at all? I think what people are asking moreover is, do you see yourself as a competitor with Libre or are you in a different space than they are?
Well, actually, Scott, that is a very good question. So we're definitely looking at a portfolio of products. So in Europe, we've launched a new product called Dexcom ONE, which is going to be in the same markets as our G7 product. as well as G6, but we'll be replacing G6 with G7. The idea is that in certain countries, people have access to G6, but they may not. There are some people that don't have access to G6. So, for example, right now, some countries categorize if you're at higher risk, meaning maybe a pediatric whose parents are taking care of their diabetes management, or someone who's hypoglycemic unaware, they absolutely have to have alerts and alarms. Those folks have access to G6. There's a large population of people that don't have access to G6. They have access to other technologies. And so what we did was with Dexcom ONE, we brought in the product. It doesn't have all the same functionality as G6. It's a simpler product, but it still has alerts and alarms. It's still all based on the same accuracy, same hardware platform with a new mobile application. The whole purpose of that product is to help grow our business internationally and give more people access to Dexcom CGM. Mm-hmm. And so that product, just over the past year, we've opened up over 1 million new people who have access to Dexcom that have never had it before around the globe. So and then we're kind of just starting with that. We've launched in a few countries with Dexcom ONE, and we plan to launch it in quite a few more. But getting back to that question around cost, G7 is not intended to be more expensive or higher out of pocket for people. It's part of people's cost of the product is their insurance coverage, but there's 30% of our customers don't pay anything. And, the other 30% pay quite a low copay. I think it's less than $60 per month. So it's, G7, one of the things about launching it is there's some coverage that we have to get for the product to ensure people can transition from G6 to G7 or get coverage for G7. So there's some steps we take once we get FDA approval.
So for people who are out of pocket, though, will there be an increase from G7?
I don't believe so. Yeah, I'm not deep into the pricing discussions, but I we don't have any expectation that we're increasing price for customers.
Okay, great. When eventually one day when Omnipod 5 and Control IQ are compatible with G7 and they're through FDA and everything, this is a big, I know this isn't really a question for you, but I got asked so many times today, I'm going to bring it up anyway. If someone's set up with G6 on one of those systems and they move to G7, is it going to just be as simple as going into a setting and telling it I'm using the G7 now, not the G6?
They're, the architecture of these systems are all a little bit unique, right? Each one is the Omnipod has the algorithm on top of a disposable. You could look at Control IQ; it's built into the pump. Mm-hmm. And so if you take Control IQ for an example, when you want to upgrade to G7, there'll be a firmware update that's required on the pump. Similar to my expectations would be similar to going from Basal IQ to Control IQ when they did you could do the update. It's going to be something, similar to that is what I would expect. With Omnipod, it's likely a new firmware version on the pod, right? That can communicate with G7. So I think it's going to be, the whole point is it's very easy for customers to do it. It's not like you have to get a whole new system. It's just, it's about making these systems upgradable. That's the whole point of trying to be able to keep up with the innovation that's going on in, sensors, AID, they're all on slightly different timelines, but you want them to come together. So
right.
That's why the, FDA's approach with the iCGM was such a good approach.
Let's see. Oh, people want to know about overlaying session time. So with G7, will there be a possibility of putting on a new one while you're still wearing an old one?
There is completely. You can do that if you want. With the 30-minute startup time, though, it's not quite the same challenge that you're trying to solve for because, right now, I get feedback from customers that the 2 hours that they don't have the CGM data while it's doing its warm up at the initial, beginning of the session is a terrible time because, the AID system's not working or they're not getting that data. They're flying blind. So you do have a 30-minute startup with G7. G7 starts the sensor session and immediately upon insertion automatically. You don't have to do anything. So it just starts.
Okay. And do you get, so 30 minutes later, I get data?
Literally, you get data. Yeah, accurate, reliable data.
US Med is a place where you can get your diabetes supplies. They offer you white glove treatment. US Med is a number of things. I'm going to rattle them off for you right now. Ready? The #1 distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide. They are the #1 specialty distributor for Omnipod DASH, the the #1 fastest growing tandem distributor nationwide, the #1 rated distributor in Dexcom customer satisfaction surveys. How about that? They have served over 1 million people with diabetes since 1996. They always provide 90 days worth of supplies, and they have fast and free shipping. That's right, US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest in CGMs like Freestyle Libre 2 and the Dexcom G6. Here's a little personal information for you that you really have no business knowing, but I will tell you anyway. I just had Arden's prescription for Omnipod 5 sent to US Med. They accept Medicare nationwide and over 800 private insurers. You should check out US Med and find out why they have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. How do you do this? Well, you can do it with a link, usmed.com/juicebox, or by calling this special number just for Juicebox Podcast listeners. That number is 888-721-1514. US Med wants you to get your diabetes supplies. They want you to have a better experience than the one you might be having now with whatever company is sending you your supplies. Switch to US Med. I'm going to also remind you to go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and fill out the survey. And lastly, that the links to US Med, T1D Exchange, and all of the sponsors are available in the podcast player that you're listening in right now. Like, go in there, there's like show notes, they're right in there, or they're available at juiceboxpodcast.com. Super important, when you click on the links, you're supporting the podcast. If you love the podcast, if you love how much content there is and that it's free for you, supporting the sponsors and sharing the show with others are the two quickest ways to keeping it going. Is there any kind of wonkiness in the first 24 hours like some people see with G6?
My experience with CGM technology over the last 20 years is that always the first day there's a little more variability in that day at times. Some people experience it more than others. Some people experience once in a while, and it really just comes from the kind of wound response from inserting a sensor. You have a brand new sensor insertion site. There's a whole lot that's actually going on from a physiology perspective. And so that does create variability in the first day. And so the performance is still really good, but yeah, you can have some of that, signals that generally they run a little lower sometimes, that they give you a bit of a dip in the sensor signal, but still accurate and reliable, but not perfect. It's clearly the MERDs on the later days are better than the initial days.
Things I think we know already. Wear time's 10 days.
It's actually 10 and a half days.
Okay.
There's a new feature called grace period. Have we talked about that before?
I have not spoken to anybody about it yet. No.
So so we have this new feature on G7 that was basically designed based on feedback from customers saying, when the sensor stops showing data exactly 10 days after I insert it, it's not always the most convenient time to change my sensor. So sometimes I have to stop my sensor session earlier to replace the sensor, right? Because you want to do it when it's convenient. So the 10 and a half day wear on G7, the grace period, which is 12 hours, is basically once you get to your 10 days from sensor insertion time. So let's say you did it at 4:00 in the afternoon. 10 days later at 4:00 in the afternoon, when it's saying, hey, we're going to time your sensor off, we actually, with G7, extend it. We notify you saying, hey, your sensor's expired, but you have another 12 hours to find a time that's convenient for you to replace your sensor.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So
do you have anything that will make my daughter actually pay attention to that message when it pops up and says the sensor's about to expire? A little arm that'll come out of it and like knock her on the head or something like that? I say,
change your sensor.
Arden, what happened? I don't know. It told me something earlier, but I didn't read it. That was great. Thank you. Every time.
There you go.
Every time.
Yeah, we're trying.
I know you guys have been doing, I know that you've been doing testing on adhesives because listeners of the podcast through T1D Exchange have gotten opportunities to be in trials for it. But have you got any results from that yet, or people are asking a lot about adhesives?
We have, yeah. So couple things on adhesive. So G7 has a new adhesive. It's different than G6. It looks similar, but it doesn't have some of the compounds that we've identified that can be irritants for some people. So within the adhesive of G6, through those tests that we were really happy that people were supporting those trials and participating in them, and wearing all the different types of patches, because it really did help us learn about some of the compounds that can cause irritation. They're not identified as irritants, but they ultimately can become them for certain people. So G7 doesn't have those in it. And actually with G6, we've been working on a version of the patch that doesn't have those same compounds in it. A little bit of it's proprietary between us and our patch supplier, but we basically are very focused on ensuring that we have as little irritation as possible, while still having sensors that last, adhere to the body. It's kind of like this little bit of a balancing act you work, but we've learned quite a bit over the last year and a half with those studies. So appreciate everyone participating in those that can. People will see it in the products with G7 in particular.
Did it become more easy because the product is smaller? Does the adhesive not need to be as strong because it's not holding on as much weight, or did that not happen?
No, it's just basically using some different types of adhesives and not including the same ingredients. And also some of the manufacturing processes we use are different with G7 that also helped enable using some different adhesives. They literally, if you look at it, you can't tell the difference, but the G7 adhesive is strong. It's not less strong than G6. You're right, though. It's quite a bit smaller, which is nice.
Yeah.
And then also with every G7, we supply the overpatch for use if folks want to. It's automatically placed in the box, and so you don't have to call for that separate.
Very nice. DME, Durable Medical Pharmacy, Medicare. How is that all going to be covered?
So generally, for so you're basically asking when we transition to G7 from G6.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a bit of a process. The DME and Medicare usually moves a little faster than all of the pharmacy contracting. So you would expect that DME coverage would come quite quickly upon FDA approval, and then the pharmacy contracts will work their way over time. But we are working on programs to ensure that customers can get G7 as fast as they can. So more to come there, but it does take a little bit of time to get the G7 into everybody's systems and in the pharmacy and available for all the patients that have G6 today.
Okay. Will G7 show any improvement over sensor errors and not lasting 10 days for people?
Yeah, it's similar. It's similar in terms of G6, but what we have seen is that, and I know a lot of customers do wear G6 in their arms, but we are seeing with G7 quite good sensor longevity when worn in the arm. And so if you look at the clinical trial results that we've published, we get better performance in the arm than we do the abdomen. The abdomen's still very good performance, but the arm is better. And so we've kind of known that, or we thought that was the case for quite a while, but we'd never run enough large clinical validation study work to really prove it. But with the G7 studies that we ran for approvals, they were quite large, hundreds of customers or patient subjects in the study, and both pediatrics and adults. And we saw in both cases the arm performance was more accurate and lasted longer in the arm.
Interesting. Are you expanding the approved places, or is it still the same as before?
No. With G7, our intent is to get an arm indication.
Definitely.
So it'll be indicated for use in the arm.
Okay. Yep. Arden only wears hers on her hips, so I'll be interested. I wonder if the size change would maybe get her to move it to her arm. That'll be great.
It is quite convenient with the size, and it's one of those things it's kind of obvious, but when you actually experience the product, you do understand how much smaller it is, and you basically forget you're wearing it. It is really quite different than my G6 experience.
Okay, excellent. Smartphones at launch, are you adding any, or are they going to be the same ones that people get for G6?
So we're basically, the way we approach smartphones is we're always working on whatever the latest available phones are. And so with Apple, it always takes us a little bit of time to get all of the validations and testing approved and through the system. So you often get the little warning that says we're still in the middle of testing this. You hit OK and you can continue to use it, but we are still in a formal validation phase. So it won't be any different with G7. Apple, we're working on the latest phones and iOS is there. Same with Android, right? The Samsung models are the ones that we support the most number of phones. But we are internally working on programs where we do want to support more handsets. We think about it as we go global, right? We're growing this global business in the US and outside the US. And, there's a lot of different handsets out there. And so we're working on ways to be able to support more. And for us, it's really just about, can we enhance our efficiency in the testing that we do to validate? We have to validate every single phone to ensure that the Bluetooth performance meets the requirements, because the alerts and alarms of our products are so important. And if the Bluetooth isn't reliable on that particular handset, which is not uncommon, then we really don't want customers using them. So that's why they end up not being supported.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, we can should be able to support anything, but it's actually interesting. Within each cell phone, there is some different hard functionality, particularly on the Bluetooth chips,
right,
and they're not all as reliable as we would want.
Yeah. I guess speaking of things that it integrates with, Apple Watch, G7 to Apple Watch, will that be at launch?
So at launch, you'll have the same functionality as G6 in the US launch with secondary display of your information on your watch. You can clear your alerts. So you basically, if you get the alert, you can acknowledge it on the watch. But the direct to watch, we did build it into the hardware of G7. So the wearable has the capability to do that functionality. And we're looking forward to an upcoming release of a new watch OS that has a bunch of support in it that we need to help us make that feature actually happen.
How about Garmin?
Garmin will be the same as it is today, which is the functionality where if you have the Garmin Connect app, then you can basically put G7 data on your Garmin watch. It'll be the exact same process. The beautiful thing about those cloud APIs that we've launched with partners like Garmin is that with G6 to G7, it's a very simple update on our side. And then you may have to log out and log back into your account with that G7 credential, but really simple.
Jake, do you have to go or do I have more time?
No, you have more time. Okay. Yeah, I was late. You have more time.
Excellent. Thank you. I was like, I'm not sure if I'm getting if we have to go or not. So I didn't want to drag you along. So let's talk about that for a half a second. Somebody asked me a question that I wasn't going to ask you, but based on what you were just talking about with Apple Watch, I'd like to understand this piece a little better. The question was, could you get me functionality with the apps where it calls me for a low, and like Sugarmate has, which was the statement. And what made me think I wouldn't ask the question is, in my mind, if you can't say that it's going to do it definitely, then you can't get it through the FDA, and so that's where functionality like that becomes less easy to try to put into place. Am I right about that?
You are, Scott. One of the most critical things our product does is the alerting. In the FDA and Dexcom as well view that as it's a really important aspect of the product. And so when it comes to safety, it is the thing that saves lives when you get those low alerts. And so it is something that validation of those things takes. You really have to go through a lot of different use cases, edge cases, all kinds of stuff to make sure you have absolutely everything covered. And that's really been what, as we've worked on the direct to watch with on the Apple Watch platform, ensuring that every user gets reliable alerts when that thing becomes your main receiver. Your phone's not around, your receiver's not around, your pump's not around. So you're not getting an alert unless it comes from that watch. And so being able to do that reliably has been something that Apple and Dexcom have worked together on to ensure that can happen. And from my perspective, on the technology side, we're really close to being able to introduce that functionality. But as you mentioned, the call feature, it's very similar in that it just has to happen. We do know, our partner Sugarmate has that functionality, and Sugarmate would quickly connect it up to our real-time API once it's been available now, and so they do have that. So it's not on our roadmap to add that, but you're right though about it gets pretty difficult to do some of those things. But
it's scary to you if you say, hey, if this thing reaches a certain number, we're going to send you a phone call, and I don't know, it has to do with a cell network, and the cell network goes down, then suddenly the alert you told me I was going to get didn't come, and there's nothing you can do about it. So you can't put yourself in that position to begin with.
Yeah. And you probably will call us and it'll be a complaint that, hey, it didn't work, and we're going to, you have to investigate it. And so, yeah, it definitely is one of those things that when we're doing, we listen to customer feedback. A lot of the features in G7 are based on the great feedback that we've gotten from customers around G6.
Right.
And so we are very thoughtful about which features we introduce and how we prioritize them. And you're bringing up one of the things that can add some complexity for sure.
G7 is going to be approved for what ages?
It's same as G6, so 2 and up.
2 and up.
So that's the intent.
And then let me just ask you about the apps a little bit, because I feel like we've been talking about these revamped apps for, I'm going to say forever. Maybe. So little things. You wouldn't tell me last time we talked, but are we going to see rate of change on the new apps?
So not immediately,
okay,
but it is definitely in the roadmap, because we've gotten a lot of feedback on that. And actually, after our last call, I dug in to see where in the feature priority list it was. So it's not in the initial release, but one of the things that we're doing different with G7 is we have a cadence. We call it our release trains, but we have a whole cadence of things planned for the next couple of years to bring significant value to customers through new versions of the app. We've been in the past, with G6, we didn't bring, we did a number of enhancements to it, but they weren't as frequent as we want. And so what we're working on is how do we bring more value faster? And it's really doing a lot of what, the tech industry does. And our software team looks much, much different today than it did even a couple of years ago in terms of size, capability, and breadth. So I'm really excited about what we're going to be doing with our apps as we continue to go forward.
Do you anticipate more frequent app updates than have been normal in the past?
That's the intent. That's the expectation we've set for ourselves, is that we're going to be developing features at a much faster cadence than we have in the past.
Okay. So I'll hit you with these little things that seem like messages more than questions, since the last one seemed like it might have helped in the past. One of them was overwhelmingly more Android phones, please, which we already talked about. People feel very passionate about the packaging being lesser every time and the ability to recycle things. A lot of people give feedback about that. And then there's a message for you here, which I'll save to the end, but this is the last question, which I think is hilarious as you're trying to get G7 through the FDA. What is G8 going to be like?
Well, we wouldn't be Dexcom if we weren't already working on that. So yeah, absolutely. We are working on G8. It's another kind of step in the wearable technology, making it, less, even, more discrete, manufacturing scale, right? That's become a very important part of how we design our sensors. Is we need to be able to manufacture, hundreds of millions of them. And so there's a bunch of that kind of technology that's going into G8. G7 is going to be a big focus for us, though. Our plan is to roll it out as fast as we can across the globe and reach millions of customers with it. And so, but yeah, G8 is a program. We are running it, and we're excited about what's going on there. But you're not going to get any secrets out of me today. All
right. Well, then I'm still going to ask my last question. Then, do you have any idea when this might happen?
G7? You say an FDA approval and G7 launch?
Yeah.
My expectation is it happens this year. We've got, we're in that back and forth period with the FDA. Things are going great. We're really happy with how the interaction. And so, we're thinking sometime after ADA, likely. So ADA is coming up here in June. And so, our last earnings call, we talked a little bit about, our expectation is sometime after ADA we'll get approval, and then we'll be launching, but in a meaningful way within this year. It's not like we're launching on December 31st. That's not our intent.
Right.
Of course, regulatory timelines are I've always Kevin Sayer, our CEO, everybody asks us to predict when the FDA approves the product. And so it's we basically are saying our best estimate at this point, given what we know today, is that it'll be sometime after ADA, but we'll allow a full launch of it this year.
Jake, Kevin's more fun around these questions than you are. I just want you to know.
He can be.
And there's a number of messages from people who just wanted me to say thank you for the technology. So I can't read them all to you, but a lot of heartfelt thanks came through as well.
Very, very much appreciate all the folks that use our technology every day to help them manage diabetes.
Yeah. No, thank you for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Scott.
Take care, Jake.
Yeah.
Okay. Jake, you think we'll be doing this again? I bet you want to know what I asked Jake when I shut off the recording and what he answered, but I can't tell you. Thank you so much to Jake Leach for coming on the show and talking today about Dexcom G7. And thank you to US Med for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Head over now to usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Get your free benefits check and get started today with US Med. Getting your diabetes supplies should not be difficult, and with US Med, it won't be. If you're new to the Juicebox Podcast, hit subscribe in your podcast app or any audio app that you're listening in. For instance, Audible, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., etc., etc. Hit subscribe or follow. Follow and subscribe. Get the next episode right there on your phone. If you're looking for support online, the Juicebox Podcast has a Facebook page. It is a private page with nearly 25,000 people in it. They all use insulin or love someone who uses insulin. And they're having vibrant and valuable conversations all day long that you may enjoy. You could get involved in them or just kind of lurk around and see how people handle things. It's actually very helpful and a great way to learn about type 1 diabetes management and the use of insulin in general. So I'm saying type 2 as well. You hear me. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.